Hello, everyone. My name is Julie, and I am here with Laura Reave. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here with me today to share about your experiences. And I really appreciate that you're taking the time to do this. So welcome. So before we kind of get into it, would you mind just sharing a little bit about who you are and your background?
So I've been studying the spiritual experiences for about decades, let's say, not, and I've been leading a spiritual experiences discussion group for 20 years at least in London, and we moved into a meetup group format in 2009 and started meeting at local cafes and libraries to discuss spiritual subjects about once a month. And then recently, well, we also have group contemplations, and then we just sort of have an informal conversation afterwards. So those are the main activities that I do. I have a PhD in English, and I've done a lot of research on meditative poetry. That's really a separate
Nice.
category.
Wow, so that's a lot of years, decades to be involved in this. What first got you involved in this? Why were you interested so many decades ago?
Well, I was in college and I was exploring. I had gotten away from my parents' influence. My parents raised me as a Roman Catholic, and I didn't have much choice about that. And so for a while, I just didn't have any path, but there was starting to be information coming out about people having near-death experiences. And I was fascinated with that because the whole thing in Christianity is about the fact that Jesus died and came back, right? And the thing for me was like, well, what happened while he was on the other side? And the near-death experience tells you that. So I thought that was fascinating. I still want to know everything about that. And then I learned a lot about spiritual experiences. I started to learn about reincarnation and out-of-body experiences, and it all rang true for me. I didn't have any experiences myself, but boy, I wanted some. And then I came upon this book on Eckankar, and I had also sort of restarted my spiritual search because I started reading the Bible, and I was discovering stuff that I hadn't really known or studied. And in Catholicism, you get like maybe one paragraph a week, and then the priest explains that to you. So
Right.
you're not really doing like an in-depth Bible study like in some other paths. So starting to read the Bible was a revelation for me. So
Wow.
that resonated. And then all this other stuff that I heard about people's spiritual experiences, and that research resonated, but there didn't seem to be any intersection. Like there were spiritual truths in the Bible, and I said, yeah, okay, that's true. God is love. Yeah, I agree with that. And then, but it didn't say anything or not much that I could find about reincarnation or the
True.
higher worlds or this out of body experience stuff. So I just figured, well, that's life. You get a piece of the puzzle over here, you get a piece of puzzle over there. And then when I found this book on Eckankar, it started to put it all together and it to make sense of
Oh,
the spiritual experiences and the deep spiritual truths. And I went, oh my goodness. And so I started doing the spiritual exercises of Eckankar, and then I went into a deep dive on the advanced study. And once I started doing the spiritual exercises, then I learned how to leave my body.
oh, how interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so that was your first, I guess, spiritual experience was when you started leaving your body from studying and using these techniques?
Yes, pretty much. I
Wow.
had had a few dream experiences before that that kind of made me curious about other spiritual experiences. But that was really the acceleration for me was this daily spiritual practice and working with a spiritual guide. Those are the main things that really sort of bumped up my spiritual progress.
Okay, so if I may, two questions. If you could share a little bit more about Eckankar and the techniques, and then maybe share who the spiritual guide is and how you met that person.
Sure. So the one of the main spiritual techniques is singing this ancient name for God, Hu.
Oh, yeah,
And
I've heard that.
you have you?
Yes, I
And you
have. Yeah.
just you sing like
Yes.
and you
Nice.
just sing that for a while. And but there's like hundreds of spiritual exercises. That's like the first dance step, that you learn if you're going to learn how to dance. And the spiritual guide is both inner and outer. So the outer person is Harold Klemp. The inner guide is known as the Mahanta, and it can appear to someone with the form of Harold Klemp or as a light, like a blue light or a star, um, or even this inner guide, which is a state of consciousness, the highest state of consciousness, which we think that Harold Klemp has achieved along with other people throughout history. And that state of consciousness communicates with you in the way sometimes that you're most comfortable. So if it's going to take the form of a departed relative that you loved, for example, then that will be the way that it might appear to you in a dream or a contemplation.
So when did you first meet both your inner and outer guide? How long ago?
That would be about 40 years ago, I
Oh
guess.
my goodness. Okay, so I'm assuming you've learned quite a bit in that time.
Well, one would hope so.
So, gosh, okay. So I'm just curious about maybe some of the most profound things you've learned, and of course, any unique experiences. I mean, you've probably had so many, so that's kind of putting it all broadly out there. And also, you did mention that you teach classes on past lives. Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I wanted to hear more about
Yep.
that too. Past lives, dreams, travel. So whichever you feel comfortable with talking about first.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I really, really wanted to learn about my past lives. Other
Okay.
people, they don't really care. It's like, but
Yes.
I wanted to know who I'd been. I thought this whole past life thing was fascinating. And I did eventually uncover around 20 of my past lives. Yeah.
Okay, that's so cool.
Yeah. So one of the more profound things for me is learning the past life connection to my loved ones in this life. Because if you have people who are close to you
Hmm.
in this life, you probably have been with them in your past life.
Oh, okay. Right, right.
And that past history really influences your relationship in this life.
Oh,
The issues that you have and the
interesting.
love that you have too. I mean, people talk about their soulmates, their twin flame or their soulmate.
Yes, yes.
Um, I think that there can be many soulmates because you have had hundreds of past lives. Most people have had hundreds, unless you're a very young soul, which is unusual. So hundreds, even thousands of past lives. So chances are you've been with somebody in multiple lifetimes and you've built up a history of love, of a
Mm,
deep love. And so when you come upon that person in this life, you often instantly recognize that person. And people call this love at
mm,
first sight.
mm,
And I really think of it more like recognition at first sight because I mean, logically, why would you just look at someone and then love them, have this deep love, have this come
mm-hmm,
flooding through? Well, one way that it easily makes sense is that you know this person from many past lives of loving them.
mm.
And now you're just coming back together and saying, oh, it's you. And maybe you've even made an arrangement in the higher worlds before you came into this life to come together and have a relationship this time, maybe that you haven't been able to manifest in past lives.
And so you probably know how all of the people in your life right now, close to you, how you might know them from other lives. I, is that,
Yeah,
yeah?
most
D-
of them,
does
not
that,
all.
not all, does that help your relationships with them today? Do you feel like it's
I
helped?
think it does. It helps me understand. It helps me understand. For example, my husband of 20 years and I know have been together in a past life and weren't able to be together
Mm.
in that life. So he was a merchant sea captain. And I mean, it's a long story how I know this, but and I could take you to that. That could probably take the whole interview. But anyway, I was working as a barmaid, and he would come into the seaports, and sometimes he would bring me gifts, and we wanted to be together, but he ended up dying in a storm.
Oh.
And I don't know if he ever had, a plan to actually come to shore and have a full marriage with me. But well, one of the things that happens in this lifetime that gets me triggered in a way is if we have an arrangement for us to meet at a certain time, like for dinner or for him to come home, for dinner, and I've got it all prepared and I'm waiting. Drives me
Mm.
nuts because
Mm-hmm.
of all the waiting, that I
Yeah,
did in that
I'm
past
sure.
life. And that was the time before cell phones or even letters. You couldn't even, communicate through letters would take months with
Right. Oh
these
my
ships.
goodness.
And so there was all this constant uncertainty and waiting.
Yes.
And so, and I connect this even with little hints from when I was a young girl and I lived in New England. I was brought up in Connecticut. And one of the things that we have in Connecticut is these little cupolas on the top of houses that are called Widow's Watch. And it's called that because that's where the women who had husbands and lovers at sea would go to watch for
Hmm.
the ships coming in. And lots of times those ships were never going to come in because that woman was a widow and she didn't know it, but she'd be
Mm.
watching out that window. And when I was a little girl, one of the things that really I was obsessed with, and it also kind of gave me the creeps, was the widow's watch on the
Mm.
house. Well, I didn't understand that until later in life, and then I
Sure.
recognized the why that connected me to my past life.
Well, can you share a little bit about how you have been able to discover some of these past lives, the process that you've had to go through?
Okay, well, I'll stay with this one past life
Okay.
and see if it will start to make sense.
Okay.
So when I met my husband in this life, um, well, actually before we started dating and we met online, even though we had met in person at Eckankar seminars, we hadn't gotten together. And we met online and we had started a conversation. Now, I don't know when this dream happened. It might have been before. I'd have to go back and look at my dream journal from years ago, but before we actually got together in person, and maybe we're just even talking on the phone, I had this dream. And in this dream, I was on a pier and this person had come in who was a ship's captain and he had a gift for me. He had been away for a long time and this was a man that I loved. And at the same time, I had had a previous dream that I'd fallen in love with somebody on shore. Makes sense, right? I mean, you're lonely and your guy is away all the time. And so I fell in love with this other person. And I really didn't feel like I was cheating, to tell you the truth. I just felt like I loved two different people.
Mm-hmm.
But he found out about it and he was furious. And so he had brought me gold coins from another land. This is kind of a fascinating thing from someone who'd never seen money from another place, So these gold coins were my gift. And he
Okay.
took these gold coins and he threw them on the floor of the ship. And I just watched these gold coins rolling away. And that was the end of that dream.
Mm.
This was before we met. Well, this is my clue, okay, to me as soul. This is the person that you're going to meet. This was your sort of last encounter. So then we got together and we met in Connecticut. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, but I figured, okay, well, you can come down from Canada and you can meet me in Connecticut and at a seminar. And if it works out, that's good. And if not, why? We had a seminar and you can go back to Canada and nobody's the worse for wear, you know? And so we met and we did sort of have a chemistry, you know, together, because that's always the weird thing about online dating, which is another whole subject. But
Yeah.
there's a big difference between on the phone or even, you know, a Zoom, I think,
Oh,
and
yeah.
actually meeting somebody in person. So anyway, we met at the seminar and then we decided, okay, well, what are we gonna, you know, do now? And one of the things that we did was we went to Mystic Seaport. Now, I sort of had this dream in the back of my mind, but I really wasn't thinking about it. And we went to the seaport and we got onto this one ship and he's looking around the ship and I said, well, what's this little room over here? This tiny little closet and it has a window. And he said, oh, that's the head. And I said, well, what is the head? And he said, well, those are the bathrooms. And I said, well, how do you know that? He said, well, I just know. And then he is rubbing his hand along the top rail of the ship. And he says, this is a polished rail. He said, this was a merchant ship. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, oh, they wouldn't waste this wood on a fishing ship.
Okay.
And I said, well, how do you know this stuff? And I said, did you study ships? Did you read about this? Research this? He said, no, I just know. Well, he just knows, you know, he just knew because he had been a merchant captain. And
Wow.
that's the way it is with a lot of people, you know, they
Oh,
learn a language or they have a talent. And you ever
okay.
see somebody, they just sit down. I have this friend, he just sit down to the piano and he can play by ear. Well,
Yeah.
he's been a musician in his past lives, you know.
Wow.
He got that talent from earning it from knowledge and experience in past lives.
That
So
is,
for
yeah, that
me,
makes
it's
sense.
just kind of putting it all together, you know. And then after we met, so I came home from that visit to Washington, D.C., and what do I find in my mailbox but this article about this storm in Houston that had happened 100 years ago. Now, usually Time magazine doesn't cover storms from 100 years ago, but there was this book review and it was describing the bodies floating in the streets after this
Wow.
hurricane. And I read that article and I was nauseated. I was so completely affected by that article because for me, it brought up, like, I guess I was in that seaside town. I don't know if it was in Texas or where this seaside town was, but that storm was where I had lost him. And,
Oh,
you know, that the
okay.
effect of that grief
Wow.
when
Hmm.
boom, that came into full force and it was with me for like 3 days of
Okay.
remembering being in that same place
Right.
of the woman who had lost her man at sea in this terrible storm. It
Wow.
brought it all back.
Hmm.
So in Eckankar, that would be like a waking dream. Like, why did I encounter that article immediately after I had just met him? Well, it
Right.
gave me another clue
Yes.
about this past life and how it was relevant to my life today.
Very interesting. Now my head is spinning thinking about my own life situation but I'm still curious about that when you first went out astral projection or out of body. I'm not sure how you describe it, your very first time doing that. Like, what did you think?
My very first time?
Yeah.
Well, there were a couple of attempts that weren't successful. I mean, I would start to go out of my body and I would get afraid,
Hmm.
and then I would just jump right back in. And that's very typical, you know, for your listeners. Sometimes they feel like they're failures when this happens, but it's just, you know, you're getting ready, and fear is very common in astral projection or soul travel.
Oh, so is that what you call it? What is the difference between finish that and then Try to remember. I'll try to remember. I'd like
Sure.
to know the difference between those
The
two.
difference between soul travel and astral projection. Well, astral projection is using your astral body. And so astral projection is kind of a subset of soul travel because you have all these different bodies. So here we are, we have this physical body. This is like our outer coat, okay? If we're talking about the clothing. And then let's say if we took off our outer coat, then we would have our street clothes, and that would be our astral body.
Okay.
And we could take off our street clothes and we would have our naked body, and that could be like our causal body.
Causal.
And
Okay.
then if we take away our body and we're just our mind and our minds,
Uh-huh.
that's our mental body. And if
Okay.
we take away all the bodies, we're just soul, then our truest self just looks like a star. We're just energy, like a star or a globe of light. That's why sometimes people see other souls as globes of light or as
Okay.
stars. I don't know if you've ever seen people trying to take pictures of these globes. But anyway,
Yes. Yes, I have.
so
So mental,
as
and then
soul,
above that is soul.
soul plane,
Soul.
yeah, that's who
Soul
your
plane.
truest self is. So
Oh, okay.
physical, astral, causal, mental, soul. So
Okay.
as soul, you can travel to the mental plane and you can explore ideas, and then you can go as soul, you can visit the causal plane and you can view your past lives and the Akashic records, or you can look on the time track into the future. That's how people get these prophetic dreams sometimes of the
Okay.
future or visions. Or you can use your astral body, you can go to the astral plane and you can explore that world, which focuses mostly on the emotions. It's like a roller coaster, the
Okay.
astral plane.
This seems like a
So
roller coaster of emotions on this plane, but
yeah, that's true too. This world is very close to the astral plane, and that's where most people go for a little vacation before they come back down again into another physical body. So the astral body is limited. It has, for example, the silver cord. You're limited to the astral plane.
Mhm.
Soul is not limited to any of those planes. So soul can go to all those different planes, but if you're astral projecting, you can only go to the astral plane.
So have you been able to go to all of the planes when you go out of body? Or
Well,
can
I can
one do
say for
that?
sure, I've done soul travel on the astral plane. I've done soul travel on the causal plane because I viewed my past lives and I have viewed things that are going to happen in the future and then they happened.
Okay.
I don't know if I've been on the mental plane because I don't know if I could describe it. It's sort of the realm of ideas. I probably have spent a lot of time there considering that I'm an academic. But at soul plane, I can tell you about because that's where you see spiritual light and you hear spiritual sound. At
Mm.
least that's how I experience it. I mean, there is spiritual light and spiritual sound that is associated with all the different planes. But when I am seeing spiritual light and hearing spiritual sounds, then I know that I'm soul traveling, and I think of it as the soul plane.
What can you describe what the spiritual light and sound are like to you?
Yeah.
I mean,
So when I do my Hugh song, I see a big ball of purple light, and and sometimes it moves out and it fills my whole field of vision, and then
okay.
it'll come back and I see another ball of purple light
Mm.
and it fills my vision. And other times it swirls around and it turns gold.
Mm.
And then it's kind of like those Christmas lights that change colors
Mhm.
gradually. That's what it happens. And it just shifts and moves. And for me, it's usually a circular motion or an in and out motion. And the sound that I usually hear is kind of like, and
Mm.
I guess you could relate that to the sound of a flute. I mean,
Yes.
there's a chart in Eckankar, and you can look at the colors that you're seeing in the sounds that you're hearing and figure out what plane you're on. And I guess the
Wow.
closest thing that I would say is like the sound of a flute, but some people say it's like an electrical humming, like zzz,
Oh,
or the humming or buzzing of bees.
okay.
So different
Wow.
sounds. Yeah.
Have you, so the group that you, well, you've been in groups for so many years and teaching. So how many of, would you call them your students, have been able to accomplish some of these things? The same things?
Many of the students, I would say most, have had experiences with spiritual light and sound. Some have experience with past lives. I think you sort of have to have an interest. If you have no interest in past lives, then a lot of
Mm.
people just don't have any past life experiences because they're
You,
not pursuing it and it doesn't seem to come to them. Um, but many people have had soul travel experiences, out of body experiences. Many people that I have taught over the years have had experiences with an after death communication with loved ones.
mhm.
So we call that a soul travel experience to the higher planes in the dream state in Eckankar. Like if you have a dream with your loved one and it's very real, or maybe they tell you something that comes true or something like that,
Mm,
we consider those to be real spiritual experiences. Those aren't just dreams
right.
to people in Eckankar. So um, it's rewarding for me to be able to validate people's spiritual experiences in our discussion groups because they don't get a lot of validation elsewhere. They get told they're crazy or they get shut down.
Right. Unfortunately.
I've had the experience myself.
After all these years you've been involved, have you seen an increase in acceptance? Is it getting better? More well known and accepted, these kinds of things?
You know what? In a way, it is getting more accepted, but in another way, when I started, this stuff was really wild and weird, and so it was revolutionary, and that
Hmm.
is actually a particular attractor for a lot of people. And now it's almost more mundane for many people. And so it's not such a wild thing to do to explore your spirituality, whereas it was pretty revolutionary when I started out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you started so young. I mean, I'm so impressed. Um, so any other, we're slowly getting up on our mark of being out of time, and I don't want to stop you. I want you to be able to share whatever other experiences or information you think would be helpful to those listening.
Well, I feel I have an obligation to answer your question about the astral projection experience. I haven't
Yes.
forgotten that.
Okay, thank you.
So,
I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable if I ask something and you're like, I don't really want to answer that.
oh no, no, I remember you asked me that,
Okay,
and I'm
good.
fine with any of your questions.
Thank you.
So, this experience that I had, I had read some things about Eckankar that were negative. And,
Mm.
you know, there's that stuff out there. And it had made me, it shook me up. And I
Oh,
wondered, you know, is this really a real teaching? And to the point where when I sat down to do a contemplation, I was asking God, you know, well, what's the truth? And I think I was using the word God rather than Hugh because I was just so worried about, am I getting
oh,
into this cult, you know, or this
uh-huh.
they were talking about plagiarism. Like there's some instances where the
Oh,
leader of Eckankar had plagiarized, copied from some other teachings,
okay,
and at least there's some evidence of that, and it's been admitted. But
okay.
anyway, so my world was shook,
Yeah.
and I sat down to ask, is this true? And now I was so urgent about this question that I had ignored the fact that I had to go to the bathroom before I sat down.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
And so um, I'm doing my spiritual exercise, and then I'm down in the hallway and I'm heading toward the bathroom. And I go into the bathroom and I flip on the switch to the bathroom like I always do. You know, it's such a habit in your own home. Just
Mhm.
step into the bathroom, flip on the switch, except my hand went through the light switch. And I thought,
Oh my
that's weird.
goodness. Yeah,
And
that's pretty
then
weird.
I looked in the mirror and I thought, well, I don't need a light because the light is already on in here. And then I looked in the mirror, and in the mirror, I didn't look like myself. I looked like a ghost version of myself.
Okay. Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And the next thing that
Oh
happened is
my
the
gosh.
phone rang and I went
Oh.
boom, right back into my body. And,
Oh.
in a way I was frustrated, but later I learned, this happens to a lot of people and they get interrupted and they feel like, oh, my experience, I was having such a good experience.
Mhm.
Well, the thing is that when you get interrupted like that, you bring the experience back with you very vividly. If you don't get interrupted, then you might just sort of go on to another experience or go
Mhm.
into a dream and
Exactly.
it just slips away.
Exactly.
And so that doesn't happen when you get boom right back in your body. So that was
Right.
one of my initial experiences.
Okay. Did that hook you a little bit? Did that make you want to keep trying that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it did. But I still had fear. And you see, I
Mm.
was in this very deeply relaxed state when I was doing the contemplation, and I wasn't thinking about trying to go out of my body. I have no idea how people do this because it's kind of like when the question for the spider, well, how is it that you walk with 8 legs? And the spider goes, well, I don't know. I never thought about it. Now trying to explain, the spider tries to get in and gets all tangled up because the spider
Right.
never thought about the 8 legs. It just walked. So when people try to do the astral projection and all the different stages, and
Mhm.
I think, oh, they're just overcomplicating things, but that gets the mind involved too, and that gets into fear.
True. Right.
So this is how in the soul travel experiences I had to be in a very relaxed state because consciously the fear would come up, and then when I was like in full conscious awareness, then I would just get too afraid and I would
Mhm.
stop the experience.
Mhm. Yeah, I've both of those things I've heard uh as being pretty common. One, if you go out of one, people will get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, or they think they are, or get up in the morning to get ready. Oh, I gotta get up, I gotta get up.
Yes.
They have this intention, and they do it, and then they realize that they're out of body. Sometimes a person will get up to get ready, and then they'll find themselves back in bed. Oh, I got to get up and get ready. And they get up and get ready, start to get ready, but then they're back in bed. It's just they keep getting up in the astral. It's just
Mhm.
so funny. And then fear, of course, will bring you back, or being really uncomfortable. I heard if you're not just in a comfortable position, your
Yes.
arm falls asleep or something, then that will bring you back to body sooner than you want. Very
Yes.
interesting. I love all this stuff. Um, well, so, okay, so I guess we do have to start shutting down, but are there any projects that you're working on that you'd want to share with us? And of course, anything that you want to share, I'll put in the links, books that you've written, or groups that you want to share, or any other additional information.
Well, sure. I mean, I can share my screen and show my group if you want, or
Well, let's do, since I'll share that on the links, I think, after we
okay.
upload it. Um, because I wasn't totally prepared for sharing doing that, but yeah. Anything else that you wanted to let us know before I have to close this down?
Well, yeah, I am working on a book on past lives,
Oh.
and yeah, it's pretty done by now.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, great. So it's going to come out soon?
well, let's hope. I have to find a publisher. Um, but the thing that I would like to mention is that tomorrow we're having a 20-minute cue song followed by a half-hour conversation that everybody's welcome to join. And then they'll see the other events that are on the London Spiritual Experiences meetup group. But our next one is going to be on how past lives affect your life today. And that's always an
Oh,
interesting discussion. So that's
okay.
our discussion for next month
Okay.
in the London
I'd
Spiritual
like to check
Experiences
that out.
group.
That sounds so interesting.
It is. And what I do is I teach people how to recognize and learn about their own past lives.
Very good. I don't know a whole lot about that, so that sounds super interesting to me.
Mhm.
Um, Thank you, Laura, so much. for
You're
hanging with
welcome.
me. I so appreciate it. So fascinating. And so thank you so much for everyone who's listening, and hope you're having a wonderful day or evening wherever you are, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.